Hello, and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 21st Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1948. John Huston came out with a bold adventure film starring Humphrey Bogart called The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. While not a box office hit, the film earned huge critical acclaim and scored 4 Oscar nominations, winning for directing, acting, and writing. But it was Hamlet that won Best Picture in the end, becoming the first foreign film not coming from Hollywood to do so. So why did Sierra Madre come up short? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, and today we're talking about 1948 at the Oscars. Really interesting year with a lot of interesting elements behind the scenes happening at the Oscars that I'm sure we will get to. But we are talking about The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and to join me, I have a very frequent guest that has appeared on this show many, many times. You first heard him on the There Will Be Blood episode in the films of 2007, and then Reds in the films of 1981, and The Last Picture Show and the films of 1971. Also joined me for some episodes of On Second Thought about Lincoln and Babel. Editor at Gold Derby, great friend. Please welcome back to the show, Zach Laws.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
So it's always my pleasure to be on this, as you well know, considering how many times I've done it.
Yes. You can't get away from this show. Yeah.
But this one I think I'm out. They pull me back in.
Yep. So yeah, today we are talking about The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, a very, very good film that I think that you agree with me on that, Zach, based on your Letterboxd 5-star rating that I saw. But
yeah, I'm a bit of a fan.
Yeah. So let's get into it. A quick summary of the film. It is a Western adventure film based on the 1927 novel of the same name by B. Traven that centers on 2 drifters named Fred C. Dobbs and Bob Curtin, who pair up with an old prospector named Howard to dig for gold in the Sierra Madre Mountains. And along the way, they have conflict with the Mexican bandits, plus this arrival of a fortune hunter named Cody. And then eventually they have internal conflicts as Dobbs really becomes greedy and paranoid, which leads to some pretty drastic action. So the film was written and directed by John Huston. It stars Humphrey Bogart as Dobbs, Tim Holt as Curtin, and Walter Huston as Howard. Plus we got Bruce Bennett, Alfonso Bedoya, and a young Robert Blake. And The Treasure of the Sierra Madre was a big critics hit. Not as much of a financial hit, but that's okay. And was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, winning 3. And the only one that didn't win was Best Picture. So, Zach, let's talk about it. Treasure of the Sierra Madre. What's your relationship to this film?
Well, this is an all-timer for me. And certainly it's one of the touchstones of classic Hollywood cinema from the first golden age. For me, I saw this for the first time when I was a teenager and I was first starting to really get into movies. And it was a blind buy for me in that I was collecting DVDs at that time. And I got Warner's used to release those like 2-disc editions. You remember those? They came in the cardboard box, and
of course
they always had. Yeah. Now I have that on Blu-ray. So, but I still have that DVD. It's a bit of a memento for me. And obviously, I had heard of the film, and I knew that it had won all these Academy Awards, and it was on the AFI's top 100 list. So I figured, all right, this is something that I need to see. So I like bought it at a Borders. Remember those?
Oh,
That's how old I am. I bought it at a Borders.
I miss Borders.
I do too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always loved the movie, and I realize now why I love it. Watching it again all these years later. I've seen it several times, but it had been a while since the last time I revisited it. There is a level of moral complexity as well as a level of cynicism and irony that makes this film really fit into our modern age. It's the same trait that it shares with a film like Citizen Kane or Casablanca or Sunset Boulevard, all these movies that hold up and that we're still watching, almost 70, 80 years later. It's because, there's not a hint of sentimentality in this movie. It's like you said, I mean, it's incredibly, it goes into some incredibly dark places with the lead character played by Humphrey Bogart. And, it's to the extent that there is a happy ending to this movie, it's that they lose everything and they lose all their gold. And, but they're able to laugh about it because such is the way life goes. Aside from that, because of John Huston's skills as a writer and a director, this is a rip-roaring adventure. For a film that is over 2 hours long, it never drags. There's always something exciting happening. It moves along like a well-oiled machine. And I just can't say enough good things about it. This really is, when you think about examples of the great movies of that bygone Hollywood era, where you can have a director like John Huston working at a studio like Warner Brothers with a star like Humphrey Bogart and produce something that is, on the one hand, a great night out at the movies, entertainment-wise, but also has a kind of emotional and thematic complexity to it that elevates it above just being another Western. I mean, this really is a prime example of that, of what great Hollywood filmmaking can be.
And also there is the level of it being even more daring than that. It's not just a studio film, because this was filmed primarily on location in Mexico. And so there is that level of authenticity there that I think you can really taste it almost. You can feel the grit of it all. And some of that's just on the actors' faces. It just feels dirty in a way that even, a lot of studio films at the time really still had a lot of that sheen to it. I think this is very stark and just gritty, and you can definitely see why a modern audience, for example, watching this movie would be like, wow, this is a lot more fulfilling. I don't feel as much at a distance from it as I do with other older films. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned the location shooting, and you can imagine a version of this movie that is shot on the back lot or out in Calabasas or out in the Inland Empire, right? Very controlled by the studio. And with pristine hair and makeup, even though they've been out in the dirt and the sun for that long. That was something that really I really noticed this time watching it again, how towards the end, you can see the dirt caked into Bogart and Tim Holt's face as they're making this arduous journey back from the mountain into civilization. You can really see all the sweat and the grime and the weariness on their faces. And that's something that you didn't see a lot in these kinds of Hollywood films, even in Westerns at the time. Everyone seemed to have iron shirts, I think that, the quality it shares with is, some the works of somebody like John Ford, who would go out to Monument Valley and isolate himself out in the wilderness and away from the studios, and, really made everybody live as if they were out on the frontier while they were shooting on location. So, I mean, that's the only thing that's comparable to the kind of realism that this film achieves.
And I just love that in the beginning of this film, it really does kind of foreshadow just how much of an anti-hero, I guess to use a modern term, that Dobbs is just with how he treats other people, you know, how he talks to the kid selling him lottery tickets.
That young Robert Blake.
Yes, yes. And even though not a lot of bad stuff has happened yet, you definitely see this picture of a guy who acts pretty selfishly, and he will just do anything it takes to get a buck, to get ahead, even if it means lying and cheating and stealing, you know? In other words, he kind of wants all of these riches, but he doesn't really want to work for it authentically, at least in like a traditional way. And I think the film really shows that there is a selfishness in Dobbs, but you don't have any idea of how dark it's going to get and how he's willing to just kill his friends out of paranoia that they're going to take his share of the gold. But in a way, this is all sort of showing this dangerous element of the American dream, almost, of, you know, going out and trying to earn your keep, and how some people, they act out in ways that are very self-centered, and they destroy friendships along the way, and they just go absolutely mad with trying to protect their own self-interest, that it has a really negative impact on everyone around them.
You can really see a lot of parallels to another film we talked about, There Will Be Blood.
Exactly.
There's this great running gag in the first act of the film before they go up to the mountain where, like you said, I mean, Dobbs is wanting to make money but not really wanting to work for it. And he keeps going to this one rich guy, played by John Huston, and asking him if he can give him any spare change. And he approaches this guy like 3 times. And the third time he approaches him, you know, Huston calls him out and says, "That's 3 times now you've put the pinch on me," or whatever the line is. And he says, Bogart says back to him, "Well, I'm sorry, I wasn't really looking at your face, just the money you were handing me."
There you go.
You know, like, he doesn't see people as people. And throughout the film, and it does get progressively worse, obviously, but throughout the film, there is a level of narcissism and self-centeredness to him. Like, over and over again, when he is given the ability to do the right thing for somebody else, he chooses to act in his own self-interest, you know? And it is really interesting. Even like anti-heroes at that time, you really have to look at like some of the Warner Brothers gangster movies to see somebody who is the center of the film and has such a lack of empathy for other human beings. That's something that that Warner Brothers at that time, they really excelled at, giving us these morally complex anti-heroes, as you say, these protagonists who are not very heroic in the traditional sense. This is an even greater example of that.
Absolutely. And I think Humphrey Bogart is pretty perfect in this film, in this role, and he's able to, I guess, sort of modulate his performance really well between being that sort of likable rogue type of character in the beginning to his eventually just becoming irredeemable and how he just becomes more stubborn and meaner and just totally consumed by wealth and his own desire to just take it all. But he's also just so watchable, I think, as an actor that you can't really help but watch him in horror, basically, as he's trying to get one over on everyone.
You know, Bogart at this time, he was close to 50 years old, and he had just now become a star after 20 years in the business, just about. You know, he really did not become a leading man until he was in his early 40s with High Sierra and The Maltese Falcon, which was, you know, of course, John Huston's directorial debut. And I think that there must have been a level of he must have really been able to identify with this character in a lot of ways. You know, that sense of never really being able to achieve your full potential and always having to like scrape by and watching other people get the opportunities that you think are deserved to you. I don't know any, I don't know this for sure about Humphrey Bogart. I'm just making assumptions.
Sure.
But, I think that there's probably a kind of self-identifying with this person, maybe more so than he would like to admit, because he really does transform into this guy to a really unsettling degree. And like even the great Bogart heroes, they're all anti-heroes. Rick Blaine from Casablanca and Philip Marlowe from The Big Sleep and Sam Spade from The Maltese Falcon. There's a sense of world weariness and a sense of cynicism that is carried with these characters, even when they end up doing the right thing, which inevitably they do. This character is an extension of that, but he doesn't do the right thing. Mm-hmm. Over and over again, he does the wrong thing. Right. And I can't imagine any other actor at that time being able to play this character, except for maybe like the closest you could think of would be somebody like a James Cagney. Right. But I think that his his mannerisms might have been a little off with a guy like this.
But again, I do still find him just to be really watchable, even mm-hmm. despite all of his negative character traits. Mm-hmm. He's like portraying one of these guys who you come across sometimes who are very unfriendly and sort of cold and crotchety, but also just really confident in themselves and mm-hmm. so manipulative in a way that he has like a weird amount of control over people. And it makes you really sympathize, honestly, with Curtin, especially mm-hmm. played by Tim Holt, who does not get as much credit compared to Bogart and Walter Huston here, but I think is definitely a crucial element to the film as well.
Well, he's the straight guy, Right. I mean, he's the, he's sort of like the audience surrogate in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
He's the one guy who just kind of seems to be in it for something greater than just himself. I mean, he's always the one who's, trying to look out what's best for the group, or, he's looking out for that. When they get an intruder, he's like the one person who's kind of sympathetic towards the guy,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I agree with you. I don't think he gets enough credit, Tim Holt.
Yeah. And at the beginning, it's clear that he's in a very similar spot as Dobbs, very similar mm-hmm. lot in life. But you can really just see eventually how he's just a lot more of a decent human being on a basic level. Yeah. And, once Cody comes into the picture, he eventually wants to divide their share up into fourths instead of thirds,
right, exactly.
Just to make it more even. And I love the scene that is with the Gila monster. Great scene where the Gila monster just crawls under the boulder that Dobbs was hiding all of his treasure under, and Curtin turns it over and discovers this treasure, all the treasure that Dobbs was hiding there. And obviously Dobbs confronts him and is very suspicious and sort of suggests that he was trying to swindle him. And that scene really demonstrates the differences in these two men pretty early on. I think it's almost even before the halfway point of the film, and how Curtin really is just an honest guy and Dobbs is just so stubborn and unwilling to let go of his own pride, basically.
Yeah, right. And I mean, the other thing about Curtin that really strikes me is that his dreams are a lot simpler.
Yeah.
Like he talks about just wanting to have a peach farm, I think it is, and just have enough money to buy a peach farm and live off of that. Whereas Dobbs wants to make enough money to never have to work for the rest of his life.
Right.
And yeah, you really do see that kind of selflessness in that scene with the Gila monster, and in that moment where he's trying to divide their shares after this guy has been killed trying to help them. It's not so much that he just wants to give that guy the gold. He wants to give it to his widow and his child.
Because it's the right thing to do.
Right, because he helped save their lives. And Dobbs is absolutely opposed to it. It is an interesting dynamic between the two, and the way that it develops, especially when it's just the two of them, and the Walter Huston character has been taken out of the picture for a while. The way that Dobbs ultimately deals with him, it's quite chilling,
Oh, yeah. It's really like in those moments where it does get to be the two of them and it's dark and Dobbs is basically threatening, like, whichever one of us falls asleep first, like I'm gonna kill you, basically.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
things ensue that are very, very intense, especially for 1948, and just sort of how it really goes to such a dark psychological place to where it feels like you're almost like watching The Lighthouse or something.
Yeah.
For like a modern day comparison of just like
Yeah.
these two men, and it's like dark and shadowy and they're going mad, basically. Or at least Dobbs is going mad. Curtin is just like, calm down, buddy.
I,
But
I definitely thought about The Lighthouse when I was watching this
yeah,
again, and especially in regards to the Walter Huston character.
yes,
I
very
think
Willem Dafoe-esque.
yes, yeah.
But
We
in
talk about
but in more of a warm way than I guess a Willem Dafoe
yeah,
type of character.
talk about a performance that really influenced a lot of performances to come. Walter Huston
Yeah.
in this film as the cantankerous old miner.
I was going to say that he's just like that perfect image, like that exact archetype that you imagine when you think of like an old-timey prospector.
Yeah.
But he does provide such a warmth, I think, to this film, and like this energy that is very different from the other characters. He's more experienced. He's too old really to be worried about like the trivial matters. He just wants to live the rest of his life in peace, basically.
Yeah. It is interesting when you look at who Walter Huston was in real life. This really was a transformative performance. If you had ever seen him in movies like Dodsworth, for instance, which was his other great performance that should have won him an Academy Award, in real life he was a very refined gentleman,
Right.
much like his son. And so it's striking if you've ever seen like pictures of him at the Academy Awards with John. I mean, like he's nothing at all like this character.
Right.
And yet he becomes him in such a striking way. And he provides with warmth and much needed comedic relief as well. He speaks absolute gibberish for most of the film, but
You almost need captions.
yeah, exactly. But it's so amusing, and also, I mean, he is the other person in the film that has any kind of a heart, because part of the reason why he ends up leaving the two, Dobbs and Curtin, is because he goes off to help a young child who is sick, and does that out of selflessness, which again Dobbs just can't understand. Is just leave the kid alone. There's no need to do this.
Exactly.
Like, you're wasting time. We've got to get going. They're going to steal your gold. Like, you never can imagine that. Like, there are people in this world that think of others besides themselves. It's just so antithetical to everything that he believes.
Mm-hmm. And the scene where, like we just said, the sort of lighthouse-esque scene of the very dark psychological elements of Dobb and Curtin, the way that then cuts to Howard like in a hammock just like
watermelon and
living his best life, just like loving everything, being fed, and like and eventually talking about how like they want to make him the legislature of this local village.
Yeah.
I mean, I just love that, and it's just a great contrast, and it's also, I think, a really good smart sort of commentary at the same time, because when we are introduced to Howard, he's not really that type of money hungry guy who just wants as much as possible. Like, he just wants his share, and he wants to live out the rest of his life in peace, and that doesn't really change throughout the film, and it's a really good counterbalance to Dobbs and even Curtin sometimes, who they just want more, and they're very excited about getting their piece. And what he gets when he gets, like you said, that sort of special treatment from the local villagers, he's living in paradise, and it's
Right.
because of his own selflessness and just his willingness to help other people that leads him to that. And you really see how, even though he might not get as much money as Dobbs or Curtin would, that he's easily the happiest of all of them, because he has perspective on what's more important in life. And you also see that in the end, when like all the gold is just blown away and he's just laughing about the whole situation, you could just sense that he's definitely gonna just have a very happy life in his twilight years.
You really do have to wonder how much the effect of John Huston's military service during World War II had on the making of this movie. You know, Huston was one of 5 filmmakers, along with John Ford and George Stevens and William Wyler and Frank Capra, who enlisted during World War II, as did several movie stars. And I think that for Huston, who spent a lot of time with veterans who were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, from the horrors of the war, I wonder, that must have really had an effect on his worldview when it came to making this film. You know, the way that the Dobbs character can be so uncaring in a cold, cynical world, you know, and how his lack of empathy and his lack of humanity can drive him to basically destroy himself and to destroy other people. I think that must have, like, witnessing the horrors of Nazism and fascism firsthand, and seeing the effects that it had on the people who were called to serve and to witness their friends and fellow servicemen lose limbs or lose their lives. It must have had a real effect on Huston's approach to this material.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's also interesting how the film wasn't really a hit, like I said.
Right.
You know, it didn't really resonate as much with audiences who were, again, this was right after the war, and weren't really ready for this kind of a story that delved into that kind of a psychological element to it. You know, there were still war films, certainly, that did well, like the next year with something like Battleground, for example. But
that was a much more patriotic and heroic examination of war. And, you know, I mean, I think when you look at the films that those guys made when they came back, you know, they had varying degrees of box office and Oscar success. I mean, William Wyler, you're going to talk about this in a couple more episodes. You know, he made The Best Years of Our Lives, which deals very directly and very realistically with what it was like to be a returning war veteran. That film was a huge hit and won Best Picture. On the other hand, Frank Capra made what is probably the defining film of his career, It's a Wonderful Life, and that was a bomb, because even though we see it now as a holiday classic, there is a level of cynicism to it,
right,
and a despairing view of the world that turned audiences off. And certainly this film, you know, suffered from that box office wise. Like, people, I think, did not want to deal with it, or when they did deal with it, they wanted to have some degree of hope, you know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would still argue that by the end, even though our protagonist has died, there's still a level of sort of catharsis sort of in the end, in a way, even though it's a little more complex than a typical film would be from this era. But yeah, that's very interesting.
They lose their fortunes, Curtin and Howard.
Yeah.
But they walk away with their lives, and they have a greater understanding of what's important in life. It's not about material possessions. It's about, you know, it's about finding happiness in other things. Yeah. You know, that's ultimately the downfall of Dobbs, is that he tries to find his happiness in material goods as opposed to with other people.
Yeah. And you can just sort of imagine an audience from this time might be a little more hoping for a film that is just, hey, Humphrey Bogart and friends are going out and digging for gold, and what a swashbuckling adventure this could be.
Right.
And they find gold and they come back home and they're happy. But this is very much not that. And so, I think audience expectation maybe played into that with word of mouth.
I'm just imagining the version of that film that you described.
I know. Well, we wouldn't be talking about it now if that was how it was, I would argue.
I think we would not be, no.
Yeah. But this film has definitely been influential for many filmmakers. As you alluded to, the similarities with There Will Be Blood are very clear to the fact that Paul Thomas Anderson himself apparently watched the film over and over again before filming There Will Be Blood.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And, Stanley Kubrick loved the film. Vince Gilligan apparently was also very inspired when doing Breaking Bad, and you could definitely see the Walter White happening there with the Dobbs character.
This is, I believe, Clint Eastwood's favorite movie, he said.
Well, there you go.
He saw it when he was 18 years old, and I think you can definitely see the influence in the kinds of characters that he plays, and the kinds of films that he makes that are, about like the dark side of the disappointment with the American dream.
Yeah. And you can also just really see how a film like this would influence all of these cable dramas,
Yeah.
I've alluded to it, centering on a very flawed anti-hero, almost always a man, just because that's how it tends to be, but is also just, despite all of his flaws, is also very watchable and compelling, like Humphrey Bogart is here, and is basically just exposing this dark underbelly of humanity and just getting right to the heart of it. And audiences are, maybe they're not always ready for it, in the case of like how this film didn't exactly light the box office on fire, but we see the prevalence of this type of story so much, especially in the 21st century, that, it resonates with people because it feels like it's telling the truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, we should also mention that this is the film that features a very famous movie line, right?
Well, it's famous, kind of mishmashed a little bit,
right?
Kind of misquoted at times. We ain't got no stinking badges is it's a little more lines than that.
Right. The full line is, badges, we ain't got no badges. We don't need no badges. I don't have to show you any stinking badges.
If I could tell you the number of Looney Tunes cartoons I saw at that time that had like somebody, like whether it was Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck or somebody saying that we ain't got no stinking badges.
Right.
That must be where the convolution of that line came from.
Yeah, there's that, and there's Blazing Saddles also did that. Yeah, I mean, it's a great line, and it's delivered with just this confidence and like this punchiness from Gold Hat, that you can see why it's lived on and sort of taken on a life of its own, even if it is misquoted sometimes.
Yeah. But I think, again, that speaks to the lasting power of this movie.
Yeah.
Like there's the films of that era that stick in people's minds and have resonance outside of, just the film itself. The fact that like that line, as misquoted as it is a part of the lexicon. It's one of those things like, play it again, Sam. People kind of, even if they don't know what it's from, they know the line. And
also, just on a filmmaking level, I just want to highlight just how incredible this film even holds up with the cinematography and the film editing, just the entire production design, just on a visual level. It's just so striking. And I think, you could say that this film would make sense if it was like colorized, just in terms of like the vibrance of the gold or whatever. But I still think just having it in black and white gives it so much more of an epic sort of timelessness almost.
It gives it a noirish quality.
Right.
I mean, it really, there was this attitude back then that color was for musicals and melodramas and adventure films, whereas black and white was for serious storytelling.
Yeah.
And I think I can imagine this movie in color, but I don't know if it would have the same resonance in color as it does. And, you mentioned those crafts. I think it's absolutely criminal. We'll talk about this more. I know that it didn't get any craft nominations at all.
I know. What happened?
It's for the cinematography and the editing and for that score as well by Max Steiner. That's one of the great scores that he ever composed. I guess I should be thankful it got the nominations it did.
Yeah,
but,
and the wins, very big wins.
Yeah, exactly. But it always baffles me that the film did not do better in tech categories. I think it must have to do with the fact that it was more naturalistic and gritty than Hollywood films at that time, and so it was kind of antithetical to the sorts of things that they were nominating in those categories.
Yeah. Well, we will get into that in the next segment. I don't know if you had any other thoughts on The Treasure of the Sierra Madre before we get into its Oscar success and failure.
I think I have expounded all of them.
Great. So. Well, yes. It's certainly a classic for a reason. Yeah. And I think sometimes when you run into films, for example, like you said on the AFI Top 100, you can sometimes look at them and be like, I don't know about that as much. But with this, I really do think that this film holds up, and it's absolutely insane to me that it does still resonate and hold up in the way that it does 72 years later. It's just astonishing to me.
It deserves to be called a classic.
Yeah.
And I think that it's going to continue to resonate for as long as people are still watching movies.
Yeah. So, when we come back, we will be talking about why The Treasure of the Sierra Madre lost Best Picture to Hamlet.
Up into the forbidding majesty of the great Madre Range go men, their pasts buried in silent secrecy, their futures hidden in the mystery of adventure. Men drawn together in their search for gold. Dog, soldier of fortune. Howard, the old-timer. Curtin, the youngster. And Cody, the intruder. These are the men who tried to tap the treasure of the Sierra Madre. Men with an oath on their lips and muscles in their arms, but men with greed in their hearts. Ready to break their backs, to sell their very souls for gold, fighting shoulder to shoulder against the forces of nature, only to find their greatest enemy is human nature.
Shut your trap! Shut up, or I'll smash your head flat! Ah! Throw it! Without me, you two would die here more miserable than rats.
Leave him alone. Can't you see the old man's nuts?
You're so dumb you don't even see the riches you're treading on with your own feet.
Better as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to keep that dame waiting, whoever she is.
We wounded this mountain. It's our duty to close her wounds. The least we can do to show our gratitude for the wealth she's given us.
You talk about that mountain like it was a real woman. You've been a lot better to me than any woman I ever knew. I know exactly what you mean. You want to take it all for yourself and cut me out. I know you for what you are. A long time I've had my suspicions about you. Now I know I've been right. So that's your stinking game, is it? Informing. I knew you was an informer. I knew it all the time.
Take a look down that mountain. This means all our funerals.
What's that?
If I'm right in what I'm thinking, may the Lord be with us. They're not soldiers, they're bandits.
And we're back. So now we'll be discussing why The Treasure of the Sierra Madre lost Best Picture to Hamlet. And Sierra Madre was nominated for 4 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director for John Huston, Best Supporting Actor for Walter Huston, and Best Screenplay for John Huston. And it won for Best Director, it won Best Supporting Actor, and it won Best Screenplay. Like we said, the only one it didn't win was Best Picture. So, pretty great haul. And before the Oscars, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre won the Golden Globe. And it won the New York Film Critics Best Picture Prize. It also won the Writers Guild Best Written American Western. which is a very outdated category at this point. But
to say the least.
Yeah. And Hamlet won the Best Foreign Film Award at the Golden Globes, and it also won at BAFTA. So this was a very interesting year for the Oscars, to say the least, because Hamlet is the first quote-unquote foreign film, comes from Britain, to win Best Picture. And there are many theories that people have for why that happened. There's some interesting things we can discuss here, but why do you think ultimately that Hamlet won here and Sierra Madre did not?
It's interesting to talk about this year in the context of what just happened at the Oscars, where Parasite became the first full-on foreign language film to win Best Picture a year after Roma came close and did not do it. And a lot of the discussions that we heard were about, can a film not in the English language from another country win Best Picture when there's a foreign film category to reward it in? And is it right for Hollywood to give its top award to a film that was not made in Hollywood? Those were the same exact discussions that happened when Hamlet won, including on the night when it won. Yep. It's interesting to, obviously I was not around when this movie won. But so I had to crack open my edition of Inside Oscar to read up about this year. And even at the time when it was nominated, there was a bit of dissatisfaction. And to give further context, there had been an increase in the amounts of films from Britain that were getting nominated in Best Picture and in various other categories. The year before this, you had David Lean's Great Expectations.
Yeah.
The year before that, you had Olivier's Henry V, which won him a special Academy Award for his achievements as a director and an actor and a producer. And you had only had one flat-out foreign film nominated for Best Picture at this point, Grand Illusion. Obviously, it didn't win. It only got that one nomination, which is pretty wild. Yeah. But even on the night when this won, there was and Olivier wasn't even there to accept it because he was on the London stage with his wife, Vivian Leigh. But there was this kind of open animosity towards this film winning. The only reason I can think of that it won, speaking as somebody who I think I'd probably have a more favorable view of this movie overall than most people might today. Although I will say, like, rewatching it last night after having rewatched Treasures of the Sierra Madre, I think its win does look bad in today's light. I think that Sierra Madre, being as grim and as unrelentingly bleak as it was, and being a financial failure, it made it hard for it to win, even though it got those major prizes. I think it was an undeniable artistic achievement by John Huston, so of course he had to win writing and directing awards. And Walter Huston at that time, I mean, he was a Hollywood legend and had never won, so that was really a kind of a career achievement award for him. But I think, Hamlet, even though it's bleak as well, it's Hamlet after all, the tragedy of Denmark, it's made with such an attention to detail in terms of its costumes and its production design. And there is an air of respectability about it because, it's based on this classic play. And it was a box office hit. People did go to see it. And I think Olivier made some savvy decisions in distilling the 4-hour play into a 2.5-hour movie that could be easily digested by American audiences and by British audiences as well. I don't know if people were ready to sit through a 4-hour adaptation of Hamlet in movie screens. But I think that had to be why it won, just because it was a little classier than Sierra Madre, like it was. Even at that time, I talked about things never changing. The Oscars have always had an affinity for costume dramas starring people with British accents. This is quite literally,
Yeah.
quite literally that.
All of that. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think, like you alluded to, they were sort of building up to being more comfortable with rewarding British films specifically, where, you know, you had the special award for Henry V, that you had great expectations, and now you have this, more of a easing into it, and now feeling like, you know, this is this high artistic achievement. Obviously, it's William Shakespeare's writing, and it's this enduring play for a reason. And I just think there was sort of a special little bit of an X Factor situation happening with Laurence Olivier as well, just as this exciting force in British theater and British cinema, and then becoming a worldwide star, and someone who had also made Hollywood films, you know.
Yeah, he had been nominated for, I'm just checking this right now so I have the exact number. He had been nominated for 3 Best Actor Oscars at this point, for Wuthering Heights and Rebecca and Henry V.
Exactly.
He won that Special Academy Award. So, I mean, he was a staple of Hollywood movie screens at that time. And, like, he did have this, you know, it's like the Mark Rylance thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, these British theater actors who everyone in Hollywood secretly wants to have the kind of respectability that they have. Right.
Yeah.
And that's Olivier to a T.
Yeah, that's probably, again, a big factor in this. And I will say, for my own feelings on Hamlet, I sort of alluded to this a little bit when I was talking about Julius Caesar back in the 1953 episode, where, you know, I grew up reading Shakespeare. I majored in English in college. You know, I'm very used to this world. And sometimes the film adaptations just feel like they're lifting the text and not really doing much of anything else artistically. Mm-hmm. And Olivier did make some interesting cuts here. And I know that this is the first English adaptation of Hamlet with sound. And so in many ways, it's a bit of a standard bearer for this story, and I respect that. But I have to admit that I sort of find this adaptation a little bit dull. You know, great performances, absolutely, from Laurence Olivier, perfect as Hamlet, beautifully cast. Gene Simmons is a great Ophelia. Mm-hmm. I mean, the production design, set design, cinematography, very accomplished. Appreciate all of that. I like the shadowy ghost of Hamlet's father. That's very creative. But at the same time, you know, omitting Rosencrantz and Guildenstern when that's sort of a bit of levity in the play, it makes it feel a bit more of just a very serious adaptation, and it's also very stagey to the point that it sometimes just looks like they're indeed just filming a stage play, basically. But all of this is to say, it's definitely not one of the worst Best Picture winners for me. It's just weirdly not really something that I would want to throw on, you know.
I think it's kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
If I were to, you know, and I'm kind of like you, Kevin. I mean, I had, you know, I did Shakespeare competitions when I was in high school.
There you go. Okay.
You know, I'm very much in this world. I'm a big Shakespeare nut. You know, I've read his plays, and you know, it's hard to do Shakespeare on screen.
Yeah.
You have to either do what Olivier does, which is to kind of lean into the theatricality of it, because, like, the one thing that I do appreciate about the film is that it's not trying to hide the artifice of it. You know, like, it's very much, you can see in the set design in particularly, this kind of stagey expressionism, you know, like, he does what he can to open it up. But I think that, you know, there's only so much you could do with a straightforward adaptation like that.
Yeah.
The other option with Shakespeare is to do what people like Kurosawa would do, or what Baz Luhrmann did with Romeo and Juliet, which is to kind of, like, find interesting new ways to use Shakespeare's stories, or to use Shakespeare's text, and do it in kind of bold and inventive ways. You know, I do have my brother and I have a special affinity for films like this. You know, we don't throw them on very often, but and I think that, just cinematically, the Kenneth Branagh version is probably the best. I mean, it is a much more faithful adaptation than this one is. It does the entire play as opposed to just sort of a distillation of it. I, like you, I'm always disappointed that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are not in this version, if for no other reason than the first play I ever did in high school was Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
Okay.
And so it's very selfish reasons. But, like the thing that I think he does get right is capturing the moody, gloomy atmosphere.
That is true.
Yeah. And, you see that in the cinematography and you see that in the production design. As a director, Laurence Olivier, I think that he was capable. And I think there's some odd directorial choices in this film, just kind of the ways that he moves the camera or certain things that he decides to focus on. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a particular moment where he's panning when he's talking to all the players who are going to put on the play in front of Claudius, and he's tracking with as he's walking, and he stops on this chair, and he's continuing to talk, and it's just focusing on this chair, and I'm thinking, well, that's pretty odd. I mean, why would
Yeah.
what was the point of that? But I think his performance, and as well as the atmosphere that's created by the cinematography and the set design and the score as well, I think make this a more compelling version of Shakespeare, of like traditional Shakespeare adaptations from that era. Because like you said, I mean, there's a lot of, like Julius Caesar, where they are just transposing the play from the stage onto the screen, because like that's a lot of times with these adaptations of stage shows, it was very hard to do. There was a lot of this in the 30s and in the 40s going into the 50s, where it was almost the job of the filmmaker to film the play for audiences who could not see it on Broadway.
Yeah.
Right. And there wasn't a lot of opening it up or trying to make it cinematic the way that you would see with Streetcar Named Desire, which I think is a vastly superior movie because of Kazan's skills as a filmmaker and taking the Tennessee Williams text, not really changing it, not opening it up that much from what it is, a play of four people in an apartment, but he does a lot of very interesting and striking things with the camera and with the set design and certainly with the performances that make it not feel like just a filmed stage show.
Yeah.
So I think, it is, watching it again, I had not revisited it in a long time before I watched it again just for this podcast. And I did see some of I did recognize some of the complaints that I think some people would have about it. But I think, compared to other adaptations from that time of Shakespeare, which were kind of just sort of very respectable and almost like, beneath a glass surface,
Yeah.
Like it does have a lot more immediacy to it than some of the other Shakespeare adaptations of that time.
Yeah. I think you're probably right about that. I can't say that I've seen a lot of those other examples of that per se from this era, but
I think Henry V is a better movie overall.
Yeah.
More impressive on a technical level. But I don't think this is a bad winner. I just don't think it's not the film that should have won.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be like my third choice out of the five,
right.
Yeah. So that doesn't make it a bad movie. It just means that I don't think that its win is representative of this year in film.
Yeah. But you can at least respect that the Academy was willing to think a little more globally here.
Oh, absolutely.
Open up their minds a little more to what can be rewarded. It doesn't always have to be the big Hollywood spectacle. So, yeah, I can appreciate that. We got some questions about The Treasure of the Sierra Madre and Hamlet that I just want to run through real quick. We got this from Gordon at Mark Wahlberg, who asked us, this is a really big one that we haven't covered yet, but maybe the biggest head scratcher of a snub ever for me. They clearly loved Sierra Madre, so where the hell was Bogart?
I've asked myself that a lot. And revisiting Damien Bona's chapter on this, even at that time, people thought, how the hell did Dan Daly get nominated for When My Baby Smiles at Me
right, over
Humphrey Bogart? I think that you really have – the Academy has problems nominating villainous performances sometimes.
Yeah.
And especially at that time. I think that it was hard for them to nominate somebody playing a character who was that despicable, and as the hero of your film. It's different in if you're talking about a movie like Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight or Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men, where they're not the protagonist of the film. They're just the colorful villain.
The winking devil. Yes.
Right, exactly, yeah. Or, like Denzel Washington in Training Day.
Yeah.
He's the lead of the movie, but Ethan Hawke is there as, the moral counterbalance.
Yeah.
So, I have to just imagine it was that.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. I also think, I don't know how much vote splitting went into play as much, but he also had another film, Key Largo, out this year.
Yeah.
Another
John Huston movie.
Exactly, yes. And so that is sometimes a factor, but it really is sort of inexplicable beyond what you were saying about how the Academy tends to judge certain performances based on the moral quality of the character. And I think that's especially true at this time.
It would have been a very different Best Actor race, perhaps, if Bogart had been in there, because I think Laurence Olivier, looking at the competition, pretty much won this in a walk.
Easily, yeah.
Yeah, there's, you had Montgomery Clift in The Search, great actor, but not exactly his best performance. And it was his first. Red River was his first movie, I think.
This was his first year of prominence in Hollywood, yeah.
Right. Lou Ayres and Johnny Belinda, no.
Solid, but yeah.
Right, yeah. And then the other two, Clifton Webb and Dan Daly, it's just, I can't imagine they were in the hunt at all.
No, yeah. So, yeah, it really is one of those inexplicable snubs that we have every decade or so that just genuinely make no sense, especially when you consider how much love that they gave for this film with 3 wins for acting, directing, and writing. And yet the star of the film is just not quite good enough. Okay. Mixed messages.
One little irony about this actually was, Bogart, when he got his first nomination for Casablanca, he famously said that he didn't think that it was right to have actors compete against each other. He said, really, if you want to be fair about it, you should just have them all play Hamlet and see which one you think is the best. So,
how ironic.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, can't find a better one than Laurence Olivier. So,
yeah.
Anyway,
could you imagine Bogart as Hamlet, though?
I would like to see it.
It's kind of amusing seeing 40-year-old Laurence Olivier play the melancholy prince of Denmark. I think he's probably the same age as the woman playing his mother in the movie.
Yeah.
So just imagine 50-year-old Humphrey Bogart too.
Yeah. Well, we got this question from Amy Thomason. Who said John Huston, parentheses, like George Stevens, seems to be forgotten when people think of great classic directors. Why do you think that is?
I think the thing with John Huston or, George Stevens as well, there were filmmakers of this era who excelled in a number of different genres. And so it's easy to kind of overlook them. You look at somebody like a John Ford, who is known for his westerns, or an Alfred Hitchcock, who's known for their thrillers. It's very easy to think of them as like, the master of this type of filmmaking. Whereas John Huston, he would make all kinds of different films. He'd made adventure films. He did like things like Moulin Rouge.
Right, not the one you're thinking of.
Right, not that one. Again, I'm salivating over that thought.
Yeah.
He did comedies. He did straight melodramas. He just, he really he excelled at all kinds of different things.
Yeah, and that typically, I did talk about this actually, I think, with George Stevens. I think it was on the Place in the Sun episode, where when you don't have a signature sort of style, like a cinematic trick that people can just assign you as you're the guy that does this, people tend to not really think of you in that much of an auteur sort of a way. And that's how people get a little bit forgotten. But I would also argue that John Huston really isn't too much forgotten,
Not to the extent of somebody like George Stevens.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I think like, Huston, because of movies like Treasures of Sierra Madre or The African Queen or The Maltese Falcon,
right.
He has enough titles in his canon to be remembered. It's got some bad movies too, of course, like his adaptation of the Bible. But also, I mean, not for nothing, he was also a great actor as well, so
yeah, Chinatown.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This was from Juan Carlos Ollano, who asked us, Hamlet, no screenplay nomination. How?
Well, there was no screenplay credited. As far as I saw.
Actually, I think that is honestly the answer.
Yeah. And he didn't really, it's interesting because I think it's somebody brought up, like, well, how is it that Kenneth Branagh got nominated for adapting Hamlet? What Branagh did, and Olivier did this too, but he didn't give himself credit for it. But it's like Shakespeare, it's how you present the play that is the adaptation, right? It's for instance, in the Branagh version, he delivers "To be or not to be" to a mirror, and it's never thought about that, right? Olivier does much of the same, but I think it just, he probably had it in a screenplay format, or maybe he didn't. I don't know. But I mean, he just didn't write a screenplay for it. So
at least he wasn't credited for it.
Exactly.
I know he had help in writing it, quote unquote.
Right.
But anyway, yeah. That pretty much explains it. And also we got this question from Ian Balakalak. You sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but how would you compare the 1948 Hamlet to later versions? I'm a fan of the 1996 and 1990 versions. So you obviously said Branagh,
Yeah.
Clearly I feel like that is sort of in some ways the definitive version.
Yeah.
I will just say, I know that people are going to make fun of me, but I love the 1990 version. That is the one with Glenn Close. Everybody shut up. As Gertrude, she did that. Yeah, I love that version. And that has Mel Gibson in it, which is interesting.
Yeah, playing Hamlet.
Yeah, it's just, it has more of a, I don't know, it's just has a little more color to it.
No, I enjoy that version quite a bit. That was Franco Zeffirelli.
Yeah.
Who also did Romeo and Juliet, that famous version from 1968.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, he really knew how to do Shakespeare well. He did Taming of the Shrew as well with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. So, yeah, he was quite an expert at that. I think that's a good version.
I would recommend it.
Oh.
Yeah. And this was from Mark Lamb, who said, were the Oscars for Hamlet and Olivier something of a consolation prize because Henry V did not win picture or actor, and it was so acclaimed and patriotic for the UK, and it was time to give Olivier his Oscar?
Yeah, I think all that is, apt. I think, like we said before, he got that Special Achievement Oscar, which probably freed them up to not have to actually vote for the movie for Henry V.
Yeah.
He was kind of due for some recognition at this point. Yeah, I have to. I think that's. I think all that is probably pretty accurate.
Mm-hmm. And this was from Nicole Ackman, who said, "How does Olivier's Hamlet compare to his other Shakespeare / classic literature roles that you've seen?"
Well, I love his version of Richard III. It's definitely better than his version of Othello. I can tell you that. I don't know if you've ever. Have you ever seen his version of Othello where he's in
I've heard
blackface?
about it. Yes, I know.
Oh my God! I mean,
yeah.
Woo! Let me tell you.
Choices were made.
Yeah. I think that the core three though of Henry V, Hamlet, and Richard III. I always think of them as of a piece. And I think that those three, in terms of like Olivier, classic, literature performances, those are kind of the definitive ones. I'm much more. I love Olivier more in something like Marathon Man,
right?
Or Spartacus.
Oh yeah,
yeah. But,
well, actually, speaking to that, we got a question about Laurence Olivier from Catherine Short, who said, "Laurence Olivier is one of the greatest actors of all time. What made him so special, and why has his legacy lasted so much longer than many of his peers?"
Well, I mean, I think it really does have to do with those core three films,
Yeah.
And certainly Marathon Man helps, because that was a definitive villain. Probably caused a lot of people to get gingivitis from not going to the dentist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the one of the funny little tidbits in Damien Bona's chapter on this book is that Ethel Barrymore was the one who presented Best Picture to Hamlet, and she was displeased because she thought her brother John's version was far superior.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll have no way of knowing because it was just on the stage. Olivier helped bring Hamlet to the masses. He helped bring Shakespeare to the masses, I should say. And I think that is probably what makes his legacy endure.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That you sort of just associate him with doing that. Mm-hmm. That he really is a lot of people's first introduction when you're talking about film, and in many cases on the stage as well. Obviously, he was a very famous stage actor. I don't know. He's just always been, for me, that's not really something I've diagnosed as like why that has happened, but he has always just been like the default kind of British thespian actor that will endure. And that's so obviously, so many people, we already mentioned Mark Rylance on this show, but, actors like that, of that sort, that really just capture something essential about Shakespeare in particular. Yeah, there were a lot of Hamlet questions, so that's the end of that. We can move on to other Best Picture nominees from this year that are also quite interesting. Let's start with Johnny Belinda, because this is a film that gets 12 nominations, which I have to say, when you watch Johnny Belinda and you know that it has those 12 nominations, you might be expecting something that is not what Johnny Belinda is, because you might expect maybe like a grand epic or something if you really don't know anything about the film. That would typically rack up those kind of tech nominations. But this is very much just a small scale, just issues drama, Yeah. It's about a doctor who helps this deaf mute woman be able to communicate, and Jane Wyman wins Best Actress for her performance as Belinda, and it's a wordless performance, so she has to rely completely on her face and her body language, and I think she's very well cast here. And she has that sort of meekness at the beginning that later really transforms into someone who is willing to stand up for herself. And also Lou Ayres, Charles Bickford, Agnes Moorehead, they all get nominations. All I would say deserved. Maybe not as far as a win, but it's
They're also good nominations. Yeah.
It's a film that was one of the first in Hollywood to have a rape scene and to deal with the subject of rape. I believe it is the first to actually tackle rape and sort of the after effects of that. And I think that, all things considered, it does a pretty solid job of treating this subject matter for the most part pretty well, considering the time period. So what are your thoughts on Johnny Belinda?
I think it's good. It's not 12 nominations good. It's funny, I was looking at all the nominations that it had gotten right now, and in some of these categories, it gets nominated for cinematography for Ted D. McCord, who was the cinematographer on The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and it gets nominated for score for Max Steiner, who was the composer on Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Yeah,
very interesting that they got nominated for this film as opposed to that one. And I think it speaks to what people thought at the time was worthy of recognition in the Academy. And obviously this still exists today, so nothing has changed. But, one of the fascinating things when I was rereading the chapter in this in Inside Oscar was that this was thought to be the front runner going
Yes. And I did want to address why we're not talking about it. In this context.
I think there's a definite reason for it, which is that of those 12 nominations, it only walked away with one for Jane Wyman, who was in a neck-and-neck race with Olivia de Havilland.
Right.
I almost called her Olivia de Colman.
Oh, boy. Well, speaking of actresses that only get the one win for, multiple nominations. Yeah.
It was Jane Wyman had a lot going for her. It was, for one, it was the kind of role that Oscars are made for, playing someone who is, handicapped and disabled in some way, a real triumph of the human spirit kind of story.
Yeah.
And she had just been through a very messy divorce with her husband, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Think about how close,
Ronald Reagan.
Think about how close Jane Wyman came to becoming the First Lady of the United States.
Wow, what a world.
What a different world that would be. Yeah. It's a very respectable melodrama that was, very typical of this era of big studio filmmaking. It deals with very hot button issues like rape, like living with disabilities, and does it in a way that is very palatable for American audiences.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad movie. It just, I think it does a solid enough job of informing the masses about important issues.
Yeah. The capital I important of it all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, this film does get 12 nominations. Treasure of the Sierra Madre gets 4. I will just say that the reason that I went with Sierra Madre here is, number one, it wins Best Director, which is always just number one, like the thing that I typically go to as, like, if it wins Director and it doesn't win Picture, I'm probably going with it. Just because that makes sense logically. But it not only does that, it wins Screenplay and it wins for an acting award. So there was support among, actors branch, directing, writing, all of the big above the line things. Even if it doesn't get those below the lines, it did feel like the Academy just loved all of these very essential elements to filmmaking that it probably, in my mind, came closest to winning that. And with Johnny Belinda, I feel like, looking below the line, there was probably a lot of these that it could have won, but it just didn't. When it's up against like primarily non-Best Picture nominees, for example, but it just didn't really win anything. And to me, it just suggests a film that the Academy can feel good about nominating, because it does have the issues element to it. but that they're not exactly that passionate about at the end of the day.
Right. I mean, I think that it's, the year before this, the movie that won was Gentleman's Agreement.
Yeah.
Which is very much in the same kind of vein as a Johnny Belinda. It's an important message movie on a serious subject, and it wins mostly out of respectability more so than passion. And I think that was probably the best case scenario for a movie like Johnny Belinda, to win on those merits. But I think when you compare it to the artistic achievement of something like The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, or even Hamlet, because the film is nothing if not impeccably made on a craft standpoint, it's kind of hard to see it winning unless they really did just kind of like unless they did campaign it as like the important film of the year.
The issue is sort of also that you also have The Snake Pit here as another issue-centered film that I'm sure ate into some of that narrative.
Right, exactly. I mean, this was, about mental illness.
Yeah.
And I think they probably did split the vote. And in fact, Bona had said that these were the two presumed frontrunners.
Yeah.
Going into Oscar night.
Yeah. But we got a question from our friend Andrew Carden.
All right.
Who said Johnny Belinda went 1 for 12 on the big night. Did it deserve any wins beyond Best Actress?
Well, let me look at some of these other categories that it lost in. I would.
So picture.
No.
Director.
No.
Actor for Lou Ayres. Probably not. Charles Bickford for supporting actor.
No.
No. Agnes Moorehead for Johnny Belinda for supporting actress, I mean.
Not over Claire Trevor and Key Largo. Yeah. So no.
Best screenplay.
No, not over Treasure Sierra Madre.
And then we look at the text and we have best score.
Let me, what one? That was the Red Shoes, right?
Shoes.
Yeah, absolutely not.
No. Moving on to sound recording, which it lost to The Snake Pit.
I mean, I can't think of anything that is particularly outstanding about the sound of Johnny Belinda, so I'm just going to say no.
Art direction, which it was nominated with Hamlet. That was the only other nominee, and Hamlet won. Definitely not.
Yeah.
And then cinematography, which lost to The Naked City.
No.
And then what else? Film editing, which also lost to The Naked City.
No.
So I think they pretty much got it right.
Yeah, I would say so.
Well, that was a fun exercise. So Joe Gouveia asked, how nuts is it that Lou Ayres got his only nomination for Johnny Belinda and nothing for All Quiet on the Western Front?
Pretty nuts. I mean, when you consider what a big deal All Quiet on the Western Front was,
Best Picture. Yep.
Yeah. And he's front and center in that one.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it is.
Sometimes that happens, though.
Yeah. That's just how it goes. And I mean, you can see how he got nominated because he had been working since All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would have. That would be about the only other thing he could have honestly gotten nominated for. I'm looking at his career right now, and I mean, there's some good movies in there, but nothing that screams, this deserves an Oscar nomination.
I also really like his mustache in Johnny Belinda. I'll just say that. Anyway, let's move on to The Red Shoes. Oh boy. Yes. So, Powell and Pressburger film, obviously a very, very beloved, influential film of its own here, set in the world of ballet. And it's about a ballerina who is very passionate about her work, and she gets involved with these two men, one of which is really wanting to control her. Glorious Technicolor film. Really just like the one that you think of when you think of a Technicolor film, I think, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you just a personal side about this movie.
Okay.
I've seen it many, many, many times. when I was in college in film school up in North Carolina, my school would host the annual River Run Film Festival because we had 3 theaters on campus, and so they would screen things there. And the students were able to go there for free, which was really great. So I could see a lot of interesting things and things that would like play at Cannes and I would never be able to see otherwise. But they would sometimes show prints of classic movies. And they screened The Red Shoes one year while I was there. And it was Martin Scorsese's personal print. And I mean, I've never seen a print of an old film look so pristine.
Yeah.
In my life. I mean, you talk about the glorious Technicolor. This film truly is perhaps the most vibrant Technicolor movie that has ever been made. I mean, it's very hard to think of a film that has had that kind of influence in terms of how it uses color for thematic purposes, and it's just stunning to me that it did not win the Academy Award, let alone get nominated for cinematography.
I know. It's disgusting, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, the sequence of the ballet
yes.
of the Red Shoes
yes.
is one of the most spectacular, beautifully executed scenes, I think, honestly, kind of in the history of cinema.
I mean, no doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt at all. Yeah.
It's almost 20 minutes, but it never loses your attention. Mm-hmm. And the staging is so elaborate and bold and colorful and metaphorical, you know?
Yeah.
It's just like its own narrative inside of this grander narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
It's, you know, and it's funny because... It predated what MGM musicals would start to do in the 1950s with things like An American in Paris and Singing in the Rain and The Bandwagon, where you would have this extended sequence right in the middle of your film that was, you know, a full-on dance sequence. And I mean, it is just absolutely stunning from a technical standpoint. I mean, and you can see the influence that it had even today. I mean, on things like Black Swan, I think, you know, about the ending of that movie and the way that the dancing is filmed.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's to see dancing filmed in that way really was quite stunning. You know, and it's something that I miss in a lot of modern day musicals. You know, I think they kind of try to hide the fact that the stars can't dance that well. But Maura Shearer, you know, she was an actual dancer, and you know, you can see that in the way that she moves. And I'll say it's a real shame that she was not nominated for Best Actress for this film. She might have rivaled Jane Wyman, at least on my personal ballot, for the win.
Yeah, her face is so expressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she really conveys that sense of desperation of just wanting to she just wants to be an artist. She just wants to do what she does best. But then these men are kind of getting in the way of that. Yeah, beautiful. I mean, watching this, honestly, it's with that restored print, it feels like you're almost watching something from decades later.
Yeah.
Just because it's so ahead of its time on a visual level. Yeah, it's just such a really fascinating look at the creative process on top of everything else. And how, like, artists almost can't function if they can't practice their art. It's just really beautiful stuff.
Yeah, what's the line? It's like, it says, "Why do you want to dance?" She says, "Why do you want to live?"
Exactly.
You know?
Yep.
I mean, that
says it.
I think anybody who does some kind of art, whether it's filmmaking or dancing or music or painting, you know, it's like, it's almost as if to not do it is to not breathe.
Yeah.
You know? It's really, you know, hard for me to choose between that and The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, for which I like better.
Well, I might ask you that question later, so be prepared. I'm giving you some time.
All right.
But honestly, looking at this film, I almost am surprised, and this is going to sound like a slight on the Academy. I almost am surprised that this was nominated for Best Picture.
I am too. And
you know what I
think,
mean?
Yeah, because it is such a bold, artistic, I mean, it really is like an art movie. And with that expressionistic sequence right in the middle of it, I mean, I think this probably had a lot to do with the animosity that people felt towards Hamlet's win. The fact that you had 2 British films nominated for Best Picture out of 5 slots. It is remarkable that this movie got nominated. I think it looks very good in hindsight.
Yeah.
It should have been nominated for a lot more. I don't know how Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger were not nominated for directing.
No sense. Yeah.
We mentioned the cinematography and Maura Shearer. I mean, that all deserve to be in art direction. The costumes. Well, it won for art direction. I'm sorry. The costumes is where it was not nominated. Excuse me.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a remarkable feat of filmmaking.
Well, we got a few questions about it. Taylor S. Cole said, The Red Shoes, greatest movie of 1948 or greatest movie of all time?
I think probably the greatest movie of 1948.
Yeah. I wouldn't go as far as to say of all time, but
it might make my top 10 of all time.
There you go.
My top 10 is hard to narrow down, but it's in Scorsese, certainly, and that's saying a lot.
Yes, which you are a fan of.
I am indeed.
Famously. Yes.
I am famously the Martin Scorsese fan.
Yes. The one.
Yeah.
Well, this was from Ronaldo Sosa, who said, Why did The Red Shoes not get a directing nomination? You would think that the extended dance sequence in the middle of the film would be catnip for the director's branch. Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I think, especially when you see, all due respect to, like Gene Nagu, I can't ever say his name, the guy who made Johnny Belinda.
Yeah.
Or Anatole Litvak for The Snake Pit. I don't know. I think, or even like Olivia for Hamlet. I think, this is a much greater achievement that should have been recognized. I think it might just be because Powell and Pressburger, they were foreign filmmakers. They did not come to Hollywood,
right?
The way that Olivier did, or the way Fred Zinnemann. This was his first nomination for The Search. It's like they were not in the club the same way that these other filmmakers were.
That's probably it. Again, there might only be room for Laurence Olivier, not him plus Powell and Pressburger, who again were certainly not as much on the campaign trail for this sort of thing by any means, as much as there was an Oscar campaign at this time.
And remember, this was before the director's branch really started to reach out across the pond, as it were, and nominate foreign talents for foreign films.
Yeah, in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of that.
Right. I mean, you had somebody like Jean Renoir get nominated for The Southerner, but that was him coming to America to make a film. Mm-hmm. He wasn't being nominated for Grand Illusion or The Rules of the Game, which he certainly should have been. Yeah. They were a long way off from that.
Okay, let's talk about The Snake Pit.
All right.
So we just talked about The Heiress on the 1949 episode, and here we have The Snake Pit that also stars Olivia de Havilland in a very complex role. And she's playing a woman in a mental institution who is trying to figure out how she got there. And we sort of learn about her past and of how she gets very upset whenever her husband visits.
Yeah.
And it's almost kind of an early precursor to, I guess, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in depicting this world. And, we also have this nurse who doesn't really like her and continues to punish her. Sound familiar?
A little bit, yeah.
I think this is a really remarkable performance from Olivia de Havilland. I think she's really great at these kinds of darker, almost like a thriller kind of a performance because of just how expressive she is and how much just of a presence she has as an actress. So it's an interesting dichotomy to have this against Jane Wyman, doing very different things
Yeah.
Even though they cover somewhat of a similar ground in some issue-based ways, it's like apples and oranges here.
Yeah,
And typically the Olivia performance would win. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's interesting because Olivia de Havilland, she won 2 Oscars in 3 years. One for, I think, one of her best performances in The Heiress, and the other for a film that is pretty largely forgotten, To Each His Own.
Yeah.
Which we'll be talking about soon.
Mm-hmm.
I would have much preferred her to win for this as opposed to Each His Own, because I think that it is one of her great performances and pretty much single-handedly keeps this film from fading into irrelevance, because well, I mean, I'll be fair to it. I think that it is a well-made movie, but I think that because of her performance, that's what keeps it from being just sort of like another Hollywood melodrama of the era, another Hollywood message movie.
Yeah.
Like there is a level of complexity to the work that she's doing here that elevates what could be kind of standard material,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think she definitely carries this movie on her back easily, and there's not much else outside of that maybe is of interest, but I think it's kind of a tour de force kind of a performance, that she's going to some real psychological depths here and being extremely vulnerable, even when she's screaming. It's just, I don't know. She has a certain mystique about her that I find really fascinating from this era.
Mm-hmm.
And I would not have minded her winning this one here, but we got a few questions about this in particular for Olivia, obviously. From Juan Carlos Ollano saying, was it an easy win for Jane Wyman, or was Olivia de Havilland close to scoring her second actress win? I would say she was close.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, especially if you look at, because Jane Wyman, she won the Golden Globe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I believe that, so de Havilland won the New York Film Critics Award.
Yeah.
Unanimously, it says on IMDb.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there was a real neck and neck competition between the two of them. But I think that she was probably hurt by the fact that, she had just won, but also by the fact that, Wyman had this sort of personal drama that was going on. And also because, like, her performance in Johnny Belinda is more kind of up the Academy's alley, I guess.
Sympathetic, perhaps.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, they're both playing people who are afflicted in different ways, but, like, Wyman is someone who is like has to overcome adversity through the triumph of the human spirit, whereas de Havilland is somebody in a mental institution. Maybe it's just a little easier to root for somebody who has to overcome physical disabilities as opposed to mental ones. I don't know.
Yeah,
but I do wonder if if she hadn't won for this, maybe she wouldn't win for the Heiress the very next year.
Well, what a great way to tee up this next question from Fritz and the Oscars, who said, if Olivia had won this year, do you think she would have become the first 3-time winner?
Well, I was just going to look at who was nominated in 1949 to refresh my memory and see if she had any real competition.
And she did not.
No. I mean, I guess the closest was Jean Crane for Pinky, but that's kind of a bad movie.
Mm-hmm. We talked about it.
Yeah. Not one of my favorite Kazans. As a Kazan fan. Kazan fan, that's a...
Kazan stan.
Kazan stan, yeah. Yeah, anyway. I think she would have been a 3-time Oscar winner.
I agree.
Because honestly, it's looking at this, who else could it have been?
Yeah, I don't even know.
Yeah.
So... Yeah, maybe if there was a 5th nominee that got in instead of her, there wouldn't have been as much of a push to get her another nomination so soon after she won 2 times.
Right.
That maybe that person could have done it.
But I can't think of who would have been
exactly.
From that year. Just looking at the best, it's a very male-heavy Best Picture lineup, except for The Heiress.
Right.
Well, I guess A Letter to Three Wives, but who do you nominate from that would
Linda
really
Darnell. We talked about it. Linda Darnell.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that. I listened to that episode.
Good. Yeah.
But do you think like Linda Darnell would have been like we got to get her an Academy Award for this?
Well, looking at this lineup, I would say so.
Probably, yeah, I guess so, yeah.
But maybe in another year. Probably not. Just kind of a weak year for Best Actress. But yeah, I just kind of think that would happen, which is wild to win 3 Oscars in 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jackson DeStefano asked us, with 3 fantastic films like The Red Shoes, The Snake Pit, and The Treasure of the Sierra Madre in the lineup, why oh why were Hamlet and Johnny Belinda the big winners of the ceremony?
Well, I mean, I think Treasure of the Sierra Madre was a bigger winner than Johnny Belinda.
That is certainly true. Maybe in terms of nominations, Johnny Belinda was a big winner.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think they're more up the Academy's alley as films.
Easier to digest.
Yeah. I mean, Johnny Belinda was a crowd pleaser and was a message movie. And, Hamlet is Hamlet's Hamlet.
Hamlet is Hamlet.
I will say, I mean, I think there's a lot of fantastic movies from this year that probably should have been nominated for Best Picture, but I don't know how in the hunt they were.
Well, why don't we talk about them now?
All right.
You're doing a great job of teeing me up with these transitions.
I'm glad to do it.
Yeah. So it's almost like you've been on this show before, so you know all the rhythms.
Would seem like it, yeah.
Yeah. So this is our Should Have Been a Contender segment, where we talk about other films from 1948 not nominated for Best Picture that were contenders or otherwise. So, Zach, do you have one at the very top that you wanted to talk about here?
Yes. I mean, I think probably the greatest film of this year that did not get nominated for Best Picture, although it did get some nominations, is Howard Hawks' Red River.
Okay. Yep.
It's one of the great Westerns that's ever been made. And famously, John Ford, who was, Hawks's rival at that time, not in the sense that they were having a duel every day, but, they just were competitive filmmakers. This was the first time that Hawks had worked with Ford's leading man, John Wayne. Mm-hmm. And Ford is rumored to have said, when he saw the movie for the first time, I didn't know the big son of a bitch could act. And this was the first time that, John Wayne, not to knock his other performances, but this was the first time that he was given a character to play that was a little more morally complex than the ones that he had been playing at that time. Tom Dunson is kind of a villain in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And the tension between him and Montgomery Clift, who is playing his surrogate son, it's incredibly fierce and compelling to watch. The one complaint I have about this movie is that the scenes that involve women kind of ring false. Joanne Drew plays the love interest to Montgomery Clift and serves as a sort of deus ex machina at the end when their conflict really comes to a head. The one scene that she kind of works in, I think, is there's a moment where she's talking to John Wayne's character, and John Wayne is playing someone who is significantly older than he was in real life at that time. But there's kind of a touching moment where he's, trying to essentially get this woman to sire him an heir, mm-hmm. because he doesn't have anyone to pass this cattle business that he has onto. He has no legacy outside of that. But other than that, the way that her character is written and the way that Joanne Drew plays her is kind of grating, But other than that, this is, again, one of the great American movies. And it's I think we might have talked about this in the Last Picture Show episode. This is the movie that plays when the theater in that movie is shut down.
Wow. Didn't even remember that. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Look at all these connections. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And for good reason. There's stirring sequences in this movie, like
Yeah.
the one that plays in the Last Picture Show where they are starting the cattle drive and they're all just like, yeah. It's, it's fantastic. I think that it would have been a worthy Best Picture nominee, but I think that maybe it was kind of looked at as more of an entertainment than an awards. Certainly John Wayne should have been nominated for Best Actor. I think Montgomery Clift probably would have been a good supporting actor contender, because I guess he was, he wouldn't have been competing against himself for The Search.
Right. Well, this does give me a wonderful opportunity to talk about Montgomery Clift again, and I'm going to take that opportunity because this is the last time I can talk about him, sadly, because this was his first year of prominence, like we said. I think he is very good in this debut performance. He's also just beautiful. I mean, the way the camera captures him is very becoming. I'll just say that. And he just has like that that soulfulness to him that is so compelling, especially in this beginning part of his career. It's just so stirring to me. I'm not as huge of a John Wayne fan as much.
But I mean, his politics leave something to be desired. But in terms of his abilities as an actor, that's where I'll defend him.
Yeah, and this definitely is one of those roles that allows him to stretch a little more, which I appreciate. Not a huge Westerns guy overall, but it's definitely one of the better ones for absolutely, and it has a really interesting, almost an operatic look of sort of a father and son's kind of relationship and bond that is sort of compelling, almost Shakespearean in sort of the rise and fall of that. So, yeah.
And there's some veiled homosexual tension in the relationship between Montgomery Clift's character and Cherry Valens, played by, oh my God, what's that guy's name? He was just nominated the next year, John Ireland. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There's that famous scene that is played in the celluloid closet, where they're talking. He says, the only two things in the world is a woman for him anywhere and a Swiss Army watch. You ever had a Swiss Army watch?
Yes.
The other film from that year that I think would have been a worthy Best Picture nominee and probably came close in terms of the nominations and some of the wins that it got was Julie Dassin's The Naked City.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which set the template for cop dramas to come. And it won Oscars for its cinematography and film editing, which for that time, it really took it was the first kind of like New York street movie that was made by a major Hollywood studio. And it's dated in some aspects, but I think that in terms of its gritty naturalism, it holds up really well.
Yeah. I just watched this very recently for the first time, and I found it to be kind of fun, especially in the use of narration, which I found to be really interesting. The way it's sort of comments on the action in a way that it's almost like the narrator is like almost watching right beside you, sort of thing. Where it's just like, watch out, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just a really fun film noir. It's on the Criterion Channel.
Yeah, Julie Dassin, he was an interesting filmmaker because, he was a Hollywood for-hire guy, and then he made The Naked City and Brute Force and Thieves Highway and Night in the City, and really revolutionized those kinds of films, and then he was blacklisted and went to France, where he made Rififi. So people often mistake him for being a French filmmaker because that was his most famous film. Yeah. But he was, born in Middleton, Connecticut, and grew up in the Bronx. That string of films from him really set the template for things like The French Connection, just like shooting out on the streets, bringing a kind of gritty naturalism to detective stories. And I think that it holds up pretty well in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I want to talk about Rope.
All right.
Which is a delightful Alfred Hitchcock film. And a rather famous one in his filmography. It's one where he has the very long takes, and it's all taking place in the one apartment. Speaking of gay undertones,
yes,
let's talk about Rope. I mean,
yeah.
This is a lot. Very blatant for me watching it all these years later. John Dahl and Farley Granger as roommates.
Yeah, they're just roommates.
It's never really said that they're in a relationship because it's the 40s, but I know it was adapted from a stage play in which they were in a relationship, so we're gonna go with that as canon.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's just really fun, sort of psychological unraveling sort of a story where, for those who don't know, it's about these two men who kill their friend and hide him in a wooden chest, and it's kind of in the hope of committing the perfect crime, quote unquote, and they invite all their friends over, and Jimmy Stewart is their teacher, and he becomes very suspicious. Great stuff here. Poor Farley Granger.
Yeah.
Just, he gets involved with a sociopath, and he's unraveling and just regretting every minute of this, and I truly can't help but feel for him.
That's kind of the standard Farley Granger character now.
Yeah.
He pretty much played the same thing in Strangers on a Train.
Yes. I just want to give him a hug and tell him it's going to be okay.
Yeah, it's interesting watching Rope again in the context of films like 1917 and Birdman, where they've sort of perfected the one take thing, but Hitchcock was always far ahead of his time in that regard.
Didn't get any nominations.
No. Yeah, kind of surprising that might have you would have at least thought it would have gotten cinematography or maybe even editing, because they did have to edit those.
They did.
But yeah, I wonder. Certainly, it was a popular hit. Hitchcock movies usually are, but yeah, never ones with the Academy.
Yeah. Well, Brandon Stanwyck asked us, Rope didn't receive any nominations. Should it have? And you just said that it should have. So
yeah,
I would agree with those two that you mentioned. I mean, certainly art direction, I think, would be very worthy for that beautiful apartment. Yeah. Maybe not any of the actors per se.
Yeah.
Maybe
I don't know.
Maybe a John Dahl would be kind of fun to have him nominated.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, it's certainly one of my faves in Hitchcock's filmography. And then we got this question from Glenda Miss Jackson, if you're nasty.
I'm interested to hear what she has to say.
Saying, why did Alfred miss out for Best Director for Rope when he was on a roll in the 40s with nominations? Justice for Farley Granger, too. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that other than it just was not an Oscar contender.
Yeah.
It didn't really even, it got no kind of critical notices either.
Yeah.
So
maybe it's just the subject matter was a little too unseemly.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing important about it.
Right, yeah.
And I think that it wasn't until Rear Window is probably the only, solid, what we think of as a Hitchcock movie that got nominated in that way. And then Psycho after that. But, Psycho was a game changer. So it's understandable that he would get nominated for that. But, North by Northwest, Vertigo, he's was always ignored for those kinds of films. So
I think because he wasn't considered that kind of this is the guy we want to award for his artistic achievement. It was a little bit. I don't want to go so far as to say it's if today's Academy, their relationship to superhero films per se.
Yeah.
But it's almost in the same vein of this is the crowd pleasing entertainment sort of suspense, almost B-movie sort of thing. and then we are the Academy. We don't really go for that. So I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. And this will set up a conversation about some other movies that came out this year, like John Ford and his westerns. John Ford released 2 westerns this year, one of which is, I think, one of his best movies, Fort Apache, with John Wayne again, and Henry Fonda playing a General Custer type that is talk about a morally complex protagonist. I mean, this is a guy who is bloodthirsty for Native American blood, and he's the leader of this platoon of soldiers. He also released 3 Godfathers, again with John Wayne, which is a fine enough entertainment. I think it's not one of his best movies, but I enjoy it. And again, I mean, neither of those got any kind of Oscar recognition whatsoever. And I think it's because they were not looked at with the same kind of air of respectability as How Green Was My Valley or The Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah, I haven't seen either of those films, but I will take your word on that.
They're worth looking up. Henry Fonda played Lieutenant Colonel Owen Thursday, and Shirley Temple played his daughter, Philadelphia Thursday.
What a name!
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth checking out if you're a Ford completist.
Right.
Although it's hard to be one when he made over 100 movies.
Yeah, it's a little intimidating.
You do your best.
But, yeah. I just want to bring up Key Largo here.
Yes.
Which is another film noir, also directed by Mr. John Huston, also starring Humphrey Bogart, where this time he's playing a man who arrives at the Florida Keys and hijinks ensue. And they're basically, it's like a hostage situation at a hotel. And this is our supporting actress winner of the year, Claire Trevor, who plays a character by the name of Gay Dawn.
I love Claire Trevor in this movie.
And that's a very classic supporting type of win, I think.
Yeah.
For like the boozy woman who is the former girlfriend of the gangster,
Yeah. Talk about somebody who should have been nominated for an Oscar this year, Edward G. Robinson.
Yeah.
In supporting actor. I mean, one of the most iconic images of Robinson's career is when he is like sitting in that bathtub like an overturned crab. He's just so good chewing the scenery in this movie.
Yeah.
I certainly would have nominated him over. I think he gives a better performance than anybody except for Walter Houston in Treasure of the Sierra Madre. I would have put him in over any of the other people who got in.
Yeah. We got this question from Fritz and the Oscars saying, has any other director ever directed 2 winning performances in the same year, but from 2 different movies? Yes.
Well, didn't Steven Soderbergh do that?
Yes, that is the other one.
All right.
Correct.
I'm trying to think if there's anybody else who might have done that.
I'm pretty sure that's it. I did a little bit of research to see if there was another one I wasn't thinking of, but I think just Steven Soderbergh for Julia Roberts and Benicio del Toro for Aaron Brockovich and Traffic. It's quite an accomplishment.
What does John Huston and Steven Soderbergh have in common?
Yeah. I just want to talk a little bit about The Search because it gets a directing nomination, taking the place of Powell and Pressburger, I guess, if you want to compare it to the picture lineup. Pretty solid, not necessarily my favorite Fred Zinnemann film about a boy who survived the Holocaust and is hoping to reunite with his mother. Again, we have Montgomery Clift as an American soldier who's taking him in. Very emotional story. Just one of those things where you can't help but be a little emotional just about the inherent struggle there that happened to a lot of families after the war, the separation and trying to find each other again. And for Monty here, it's a Best Actor nomination, which I think is very rare for adult male actors to get a nomination on their first year in the
Yeah.
industry, making movies. Typically we see that with a lot more of female actors.
He was the Timothy Chalamet of
Yes. I actually like that comparison.
Yeah. I think it just speaks to the kind of year that he had, because having this and Red River at the same time probably helped get him that nomination. I agree with you on The Search. I mean, I think it's a good movie. I like other Fred Zinnemann movies better, but it's very typical of the kinds of films that he would get nominated for.
And then I just wanted to briefly talk about it since we got a comment from Brandon Stanwyck saying, not quite a question, but congrats on making it to Barbara Stanwyck's final and undoubtedly weakest nomination.
Yes.
So this is for Sorry, Wrong Number.
And there was a quote from Inside Oscar where after she had lost, she said, well, if I get nominated again, they'll have to give me a door prize, right? And she was never nominated again.
Don't say these things. They just make it even more sad.
I know.
When it didn't happen. Yeah.
It's really sad that, I'm looking at her Oscar nominations right now. Certainly Double Indemnity was the one she should have won for. All due respect to Ingrid Bergman and Gaslight, but I think Stanwyck's, it holds up a little bit better. And she never got nominated for things like The Lady Eve, or The Furies, some of her great performances. It's a real shame that this was it for her. And if it had been for a stronger movie, maybe she could have parlayed that into an overdue Oscar narrative.
Yeah.
Sorry, Wrong Number is just kind of a potboiler and not that great. Another Anatole Litvak movie.
Yep.
Oh,
what a year.
What a year for that guy.
Yeah. Did you have any other films here you wanted to highlight?
There's a lot of Force of Evil, which Abraham Polanski's movie that is a big influence on Martin Scorsese and features John Garfield's probably his best performance. That was a movie that came nowhere near close to Oscar, but it holds up surprisingly well. This was also the year that David Lean made Oliver Twist, or I should say it was released this year. It wasn't released in the United States this year, I don't think. Coming right off of his Great Expectations. Unfaithfully Yours by Preston Sturges, a film that was a huge box office bomb, and really a dark turn from the kinds of screwball comedies he had been making at that time, but holds up really well because it's about Rex Harrison plays a man who is he plays a musical conductor who is fantasizing about killing his wife.
Sure.
And it's this was also the year that Nicholas Ray made They Live by Night, which is a movie that I really love and kicked off his career. Anthony Mann made Raw Deal, one of the great kind of grimy film noirs. Easter Parade came out this year. A Foreign Affair by Billy Wilder. Moonrise by Frank Borzage. Not that Moonrise. Frank Capra made State of the Union, which is not a great movie, but it's fine. It's one of the lesser Tracy Hepburn vehicles, but if you're a fan of theirs, you can't go wrong with it. There's a lot of interesting things going on in Europe at that time that you're going to see trickle down into American cinemas, and you're going to see American filmmakers discovering the works of De Sica and Rossellini at this time, and the incredibly dynamic work that they were doing in that post-war era.
Yeah, so we're at a really interesting inflection point, I think, in cinema at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Like we said, with more acceptance of foreign films within the Academy, just more of an opening up to different kinds of films. So.
And I know that everybody is screaming at me right now because I left off the definitive film of 1948, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Ah, of course.
Which I'm looking at the IMDb, the ranked list that they have of all the movies from 1948, and that is the 9th most popular. It's above Hamlet, the Best Picture winner, which
Take
is number 13.
Hamlet.
And
Wow.
above, The Fallen Idol came out this year. I know you talked about it in your 49 episode again.
Yeah.
I guess we should also talk about the big surprise Oscar snubby of that year of 1948.
Which one?
You know which movie I'm talking about?
Joan of Arc?
Yep, that's the
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it gets 7 nominations, so it's not an entire snub here, but not a Best Picture nomination, which not people, but the producer I know was very upset about.
Very much so. That was the former president of the Academy, Walter
Wanger, right. Thank you.
Okay. I'm like Barbara, can't even think of her name, the host of The View.
Barbara Walters.
I'm like Barbara Walters. I can't pronounce anybody's names. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting reading the chapter of Inside Oscar and about what a push there was to get that movie nominated, even though it was kind of a turd, you know.
Overproduced. Yeah.
Yeah, and not one of the best Ingrid Bergman performances. The movie that literally killed Victor Fleming because he had a heart attack right after he finished directing it. And I think he had an affair with Ingrid Bergman also while he was making it. So there was some behind the scenes scandals. But I'm glad it didn't get nominated because I can say that at least the 5 films that were nominated were at least good.
Yeah,
some of them are great. So. This would have been a real stinker.
Yeah, which honestly is something I would come to expect at this point from this era. That just tends to be the trend, that when I'm talking about these Best Picture nominees, that there's usually one that's like, what? And you're watching it and you're just like, even for the time period, how do you nominate this?
Yeah.
But yeah, this time I think they did a pretty solid job, and I commend them, especially for the Red Shoes nomination. Absolutely. Yeah. I would say this is definitely one of the better, especially from the 40s, Best Picture lineups.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
They made good choices.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we come back, we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Hamlet deserved Best Picture or if The Treasure of the Sierra Madre deserved it a little more.
The nominated pictures are Hamlet, J. Arthur Rank, Two Cities Film, Universal International, British, Johnny Belinda, Warner Brothers, The Red Shoes, J. Arthur Rank, Archer's Eagle Lion, British, The Snake Pit, 20th Century Fox, The Treasure of Sierra Madre, Warner Brothers. And the winner, Hamlet, J. Arthur Rank, Two Cities Film.
And we're back. So now we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Hamlet deserved Best Picture or if The Treasure of the Sierra Madre deserved it more. Zach Laws, what is your verdict?
Treasure of the Sierra Madre deserved it more. And all due respect to Hamlet, but yeah.
Agreed. Totally. I think The Treasure of the Sierra Madre is leagues over Hamlet. Honestly, in my opinion, it is.
Yep.
In terms of entertainment value, and even on a production level, I think it has less seams to it than Hamlet does.
Yeah.
And I'm so captivated by just the depths that it plumbs, psychologically, about just like the human spirit, which you could say Hamlet does that pretty well too, but I'm just naturally more compelled by.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you're talking about one of the great American movies here.
Yeah.
One of the great movies of all time. Mm-hmm. Versus a very respectable, very atmospheric and well-made, but, not in the same league, I think, as The Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Yeah. Would you say The Red Shoes is any better?
That's really hard.
Yeah.
Personally, I probably like The Red Shoes better, but if I were to pick which film should have won Best Picture, I'd say The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. In terms of like an overall representation for the year in film, I think Red Shoes is absolutely a masterpiece. But so is Treasure of the Sierra Madre. That's why it's hard to make these calls sometimes.
Yeah, I still go with the Treasure of the Sierra Madre here. That I think it should have won, and I think it is the best. Honestly, even with how incredible the Red Shoes is, it's a kind of a tough call. But I think that Sierra Madre just, I don't know, it just speaks to me a little more in in how it executes its vision.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks so much, Zach, for another incredible long chat about an Oscar year. It's always fun chatting with you.
Thank you. Same here. I'm always happy to do it.
Yeah. And so tell the people where they can find more from you on the internet.
Well, of course, you can find everything I do at Gold Derby. And you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Zach Laws. That's ZACHLAWS.
All right. And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up. Go to any podcast platform and you'll probably find my show, where you can rate, review, and subscribe. And if you love the show, then you can give me a few bucks and head on over to patreon.com/andtherunnerup and hopefully get some bang for your buck with some bonus content, including some On Second Thought episodes with my distinguished guest here.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah. And so with that, thanks again, Zach.
You're welcome.
And I will bid you all adieu.